It's an enormous privilege for me as an Alva girl to be able to welcome you all to Clackmannanshire, the wee county. Bet most of you couldn't find it on a map before you set out to this morning. And there's a reason for that, because we have some of the best kept secrets here. And some of them are good and some of them are not so good. But the bottom line is this: Clackmannanshire is Scotland in miniature. Probably to some extent it's the world in miniature, because there's a bit of the best of the world here and there's an awful lot of the worst as well. But it's great to see so many of you here. I'd love to welcome my fellow Scotswomen and also the rebels and the colleagues and the dinosaurs that have come from much further afield to support us as we celebrate the women's achievements. We remember those who have gone before us, and we look forward to the future with as much courage and power as we can possibly gather, given that in Scotland today the storms of war are gathering against us as a sex class. Now, I was born and brought up here. I've lived most of my life here and I work in Clackmannanshire, and I hope you'll indulge me when I say that in Women's History Month it's appropriate, obviously, to look back on the women who went before us and consider the struggles and the fights that they had to bring us to where we are today, where we have rights and protections like never before, but again, they're in jeopardy, as we all know. 300 years ago, women worked in the mills in the Hillfoots towns in Tillycootray and Alva. Some of them actually had to walk across the Ochil Hills in the morning to go to their work, worked a full shift and crossed the hills to go back home again at night, many of them obviously looking after families and elderly parents and the like. 200 years ago, women worked in pits and in mines in Clackmannanshire. Their children worked there, their men worked there, some of their children were injured and died there. If you look into the history of this county, you will see that less than 200 years ago, children as young as 7 were picking coal. Wee laddies were off their work for 3 months when they lost some fingers and gagging to go back to work to make money to eke out the very meagre living that their families had. It's not so very long ago. And the women that brought up these young lads and saw them going into pits and mines were themselves thrilled. They were no better than slaves. They were paid for their own labours, usually in tokens that they had to spend in the shops that were owned by the mine owners. And they were bribed at the end of every week with a couple of halves of whisky. You can read the history where it says quite clearly that the mine owners liked to pay the women in whisky because it kept them obedient and in line and compliant. I think we know exactly what that involved for some of these poor souls. So that was Clackmannanshire and many parts of Scotland a couple of 100 years ago. 100 and odd years ago, though, the First World War, when many women saw their sweethearts go off to war, never to be seen again, and some of them lived very single, solitary lives thereafter, not through choice but through circumstance. In the Second World War, good friends of mine, long gone, worked as land girls. Carol McPherson, one of the most famous locally, an Alva woman, one of the dark souls that made the golden light of this county sparkle. Others after her founded and ran the cooperative societies across the board. Others like Sheena Fraser helped to run the Women's Aid Organisation. The Jessie Seaths of this world were the school dinner ladies, and multiple women were midwives and nurses and carers and home helps, and they looked after our community, they looked after themselves, they helped and supported each other. Thousands of them, as I said earlier, were mill workers hundreds of years ago, but 20 odd years ago the last mill in Clackmannanshire closed, and with that a lot of sisterhood was forgotten about. If you worked in the mills locally and something had happened to you, you'd fallen upon hard times, somebody had taken a loan of you, a guy had taken advantage of you and ran away and left you in your hour of need, you knew that there were women that you worked beside. If you hadn't a mother or a sister, you had a boss in the mill, whether you were a spinner or a knitter or a collector or a gatherer. There was always somebody you could turn to for support. They would hold you up, they would dry your tears, they would take you to the doctor, they would take you to the hospital, they would find refuge for you, a safe place, somewhere to get away from all the ills and the vagaries that life can bring. And those are the women that I'm proud to call my ancestors, my friends, my colleagues, my supporters, because each and every single one of those women and every woman in here today knows what it is to be a woman. And I'm supposed to talk to you about parental rights and responsibilities, but I kind of lost my way a wee bit. So, in relation to parental rights, these women that I've spoken about and the women that I see daily at work understand what it is to be a parent. Some of them understand that there's a difference between arguing with your ex about the particular arrangements for your children within a family, and there are very major issues that arise when the state interferes in how you care for your children. And when the state interferes, it does so because it understands that your children are at risk. And the state's supposed to help and support those children and help and support families in difficult times. What the state is not supposed to do, and all of these books in front of me will tell you this, what the state is not supposed to do so far is to encourage children to keep secrets from their parents. And I see something very sinister developing in Scotland these days. You've seen it yourselves, whereby we have multiple sets of guidance issued by a government which has lost its way. Guidance which does not celebrate and support the rights and the responsibilities of parents to guide their children and rear them in a sensible and child-centred and decent, kindly fashion, but guidance that says if a child tells you that he or she is trans-identifying, or you learn that a child aged 13 but less than 16 has had sex, you don't have to tell the parents. It's okay for the state to encourage teachers to keep secrets. Teachers and other carers and kids and people that come in contact with our children are there to help our children and to support the family unit and to do the best that they can. What these professionals are not needing is a set of guidance from a government which is cowardly and which misdirects itself on a daily basis. So finally, you'll all have seen and watched with, I suppose, disappointment, no real surprise, and probably utter horror, the spectacle that we saw in Holyrood the other day, when we had a government minister pretend that it's okay to remove medical safeguards and it's okay to destroy gatekeeping and safeguarding, all in the face of the feelings of a man who decides on his own say-so that he wants to call his cell a woman. But the worst aspect is that one that's been highlighted and I hope leads to a resignation as well as substantial reflection, and it is this: the acknowledgement by a government minister that a predator doesn't have to pretend to be what he's not. Predators, I've said it before and I'll say it 1,000 times, predator does not have the word predator tattooed on his forehead. Think on, Shona Robson. Think on.